the last time I was here to teach in this setting was the week of Thanksgiving, and so I come again on an American holiday. Seriously, though if I'm here to praise Columbia or bury her, we'll find out as we go. So does anybody know what holiday it is? It's Flag Day. Today, June 14th, is Flag Day. It is also the anniversary of the Army, but that is not by law a holiday. Flag Day has been a holiday for a long time. There was rain, I heard today. This is sort of for me picking up this thread of like, how do we as modern liberal Jews make sense of American secular holidays and incorporate them into our lives and respond in an authentic Jewish way to them? And this is in part inspired by this. I mean, I've been thinking about this for a while, but I've now increasingly guided by this book, The Faith of America. Has anybody ever encountered this? It is a fascinating anthology. It's really a secular prayer book for secular American holidays, written primarily by Mordechai Kaplan in 1954. Yeah, so it's got like selections for all these different holidays. Here's New Year's Day. There's like Washington's birthday, and so it's meant to be used in. They're all. It is explicitly religious and explicitly non-sectarian. So edited primarily by Kaplan with another early Reconstructionist colleague and a minister, a Protestant minister. I don't remember his background. And so in part guided by that, I'm trying to raise these questions. He was not trying to answer what are the Jewish ways to do this. But I'm sort of looking at him as a guide and trying to answer like, what are the Jewish ways to celebrate these holidays? So with that. These holidays, all of these holidays. So I started here just with a little verse to show us that like flags are not a foreign concept, are hardly a foreign concept. So there are a few references to Degel in Torah, and it's translated variously as flag or banner. It is most commonly, as we see here, the Israelites shall camp each man with his standard under the banners of their ancestral house. They shall camp around the Ohel Moed at a distance. So we see that we see flags exist in Torah, used to identify groups, subgroups within the Jewish people. They are primarily used in a military context. So the standards here, as if you we'll look ahead a little bit, Chizkuni comments on this with much more explanation that I've cut down here. We understand that the primary flags used by the Israelites in Torah, there were probably 4 flags that referred to 4 military divisions. This Chizkuni commentary offers us sort of like a little bit of this system, this perceived system for what the flags were and the symbology. So they had names of the forefathers' houses. So there's a question of, is that the name of the tribes, or is that some other system? He proposed that they all had versions of the names of the Avot, like 1 letter each on each of their flags. Then there's also this alternate interpretation that they had designs that correspond to other believed characteristics or stories about the various tribes, and they corresponded to the color on the breastplate, on Aaron's breastplate. And what I really love about this this commentary is this last line here. The various nations learned from the Israelites to make tablecloths and the like in a variety of colors. So not only did the Israelites have flags, but we invented them and delivered them to the rest of the world. We taught everybody about flags. So this has been there in some sense from the beginning. National flags did not become something that communities or individuals had on their own until the 19th century. And for the sake of just trying to make our life a little easier, I've used a couple of, oh no, just one, yay. Just one article, one news article here, which gives us a bit of summary. As it explains, actually, before I read this, I want to say, we heard during our Torah service two stories of Jewish Americanization through the military, right? You each shared stories about sort of integrating American culture through your family's history in service, which is key to how we ended up with flags in our synagogues. So I want to talk about how do we relate to the flag, but in particular, how do we relate to the flag in our spaces? And as you all may know, there's a new flag in front as of like this week. Yesterday, brand new flag here. So on that subject, how and why do we get to flags in synagogues? And maybe for the question I have in my head, but let's not answer it, is should we? So here's a bit of the history. Flags were not a permanent fixture in American synagogues until World War I, with the popularization of the service flag, a banner that used stars to symbolize family members who were fighting or killed in the war. Has anyone ever seen this? So this is, has anyone heard of the term Gold Star families? Oh, yeah. So the Gold Star family, that comes from this idea of a service flag, which were originally, I don't remember what the other colors were, but there were other colors that corresponded to other things. So Gold Star means someone who's been lost, someone who's died in battle, but there were other colors that referenced when you had someone in your family who was alive and actively serving. And that was maybe a blue star. I don't remember what all the colors were. But that's where the term Gold Star family comes from, is because you'd have the service flag while the person was in the blue or white star flag up, indicating that you had a loved one who was serving. And then if they perished, you have this gold service flag. So during World War I, congregations started to hang the service flags to indicate that they had members who were serving in the U.S. military in World War I. As Rabbi Gary Zola explains, these service flags, while they were not literally the American flag, they had a familiarity, they had stars on them, and they were American colors. And churches and synagogues began to fly those service flags inside the sanctuaries as a tribute to the soldiers and as a patriotic symbol. So critically, to me, we're operating on two levels, right? Like there's a patriotic acknowledgement, but there's also an inward communal acknowledgement, right? It's different from just a flag. And as he explains, this, though, opened the gates to American flags being displayed as a permanent fixture inside synagogues, usually flanking the bima. Yeah, is this a raised hand for a question or a?
It's interesting that American Jews fought in significant numbers in the Civil War.
Yes.
But didn't have that. In World War I, that was the first time that Jews fought in very significant numbers as Americans, because that's after the great migration of 1880 to 1920.
Yeah.
So you had people who had come in from 1880 onward, who had now been in the from 1881, been now in the United States for 25 years. They had kids who were raised as Americans.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point. And in the interest of moving along, I did not include the first noted examples, like recorded examples of the American flag in American sanctuaries was after Lincoln's death. Was like as a memorial to Lincoln, which the American Jews responded
in the North.
In the North, yes, exactly, and the West, in the North and the West. In fact, I mean, Jews in America, the Jews in the North responded so emotionally to Lincoln's death that many claimed that he'd been secretly Jewish. Like that was like a very prominent rumor, legend in America in the early 20th century, rather. So how does this strike us, flags in synagogues, just off the bat, without thinking about it? maybe hearing a little bit of the history. It seems totally normal to us, right? No? Say more. Chabad, yeah. I think Chabad would also tell you they don't have synagogues.
Well, they just, yeah.
I think it's interesting, maybe assuming an outsider perspective on Jews and enlistment in the army. Like, I remember in Mark Twain, kind of related to what Rabbi Berenbaum brought up, Mark Twain wrote an essay about Jews where he was kind of investigating why people or
Yeah.
what anti-Semitic attitudes had to do with actual Jews. And he is very favorable toward the Jews, but I guess in the interest of honesty, he says, but Jews don't serve in the army the same numbers that non-Jews do. And then he corrects himself later. He says, I actually looked into the statistics, or someone wrote me a letter or something, and I was wrong about that. So.
Oh, interesting.
Well, my grandfather, who was born in Belarus, used to say, I love America because a Jew can be a Jew here. So I'm not sure, you've given us a history, but I think there's a lot of patriotism that's involved.
Yeah. One of the key halachic argumentations has been about the appropriateness, has been a Talmudic story of sages gathering to pray somewhere where there's a statue of the king. And they determined that that was suboptimal but not prohibitive. And that's been one of the driving forces in the sort of sensibility about national symbols in Jewish communal spaces really since then. Now, I endeavored to look at the conservative movement's responsa literature on the American flag, and what I found was
Nothing.
nothing at all. Zero, literally zero. But the Reform movement has answered related questions 2 times, and so we have here 2 just excerpts from the responsa, which I'll say, I think it's a tricky thing to try and discuss in halachic terms, Reform responsa, but I will say that given the ubiquitousness of American and Israeli flags in Reform and conservative synagogues in America, I think that there's something here that's telling for us culturally about sort of our shared sensibilities around the flag and how we think of it in our synagogues. So the first bite at the apple, so to speak, comes in 1954, and there's a question about there's a question about both flags, but it relates to the Israeli flag, the emergence of the Israeli flag, which people had started to see around Jewish communities. And so Israel Benton, who wrote most of the response of the time, writes in part, on the Sabbath day, during the morning services, immediately after the scriptural lesson, the prayer for the welfare of the government is recited in all the synagogues of the world. In every country, the Jew thus affirms his faith from week to week, that loyalty to the institutions of the particular country of which he is a citizen is a solemn religious obligation. The presence of the American flag in the synagogues of the land, far from being an intrusion, may well serve to strengthen in us the spirit of worship, symbolizing as it does the duties we owe to our country, obedience to its laws, and zealous support of its rights and interests. Our national flag speaks to us with the voice of religion and partakes, therefore, in the sanctity of our religious symbols. Our national flag speaks to us, I'm repeating this, with the voice of religion, and partakes, therefore, of the sanctity of our religious symbols. What the American flag is to the American Jew, the British flag is to the British Jew, the French flag to the French Jew, the Israeli flag to the citizens of Israel. The American flag has no proper place in the synagogues of Israel, even as the Israeli flag is quite out of place in an American synagogue. So this is 6 years into Israel's existence. He goes on to mention the flag code, which has rules of display of the American flag, pointing out that having an Israeli flag in an American synagogue may in fact violate the terms under which you are meant to display the American flag in America. And so he ultimately concludes, American Jewish congregations, if they so desire, may therefore display the Israeli flag when a representative of the State of Israel is present in their midst, or when the State of Israel celebrates a special anniversary, such as the Day of Independence.
He told you, that's right there.
There are laws as to how to display the American flag if the Israeli flag is being displayed, and that is the American flag should be on the right side of the ark, the left side of the congregation, and the Israeli flag on the left side of the ark, the right side of the congregation. Though this congregation, I don't know if it's still doing it in the sanctuary for a period of time, was doing it incorrectly and improperly and could be cited for that. But and the other thing is the American flag must be higher than the Israeli flag.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that the American flag came into synagogues, especially was that if you wanted to display the Israeli flag, you didn't want to be accused of single loyalty without loyalty to the United States.
Right.
So even though for those who wanted to display the Israeli flag, the American flag then became a must.
Yeah, so it worked in, that's a really vital point, thank you for bringing it up. It worked in both directions, right? Absolutely.
Michael, that issue was rectified primarily because of our Torah reader who brought it to the attention. Mark Wolf made the issue that it could not be done. And even here in the Daily Minyan at one point, there was a machloket, a dispute over which side the flag should be, but it was taken care of. But the coming of the Israeli flag really was much different. I will never forget this. In 1972, I was at a synagogue, and on the right side, there was the American flag. On the left side, there was the bear flag of the state of California. Ooh. And no mention of all of the Jewish, the Israeli flag.
Where was that?
It was at a Reform congregation.
Well, I'm wondering where, if you recall, where in California.
All right, if
It doesn't.
you really want to know,
It's not that important. It's not that important.
in Los Angeles.
Okay. I'm interested because in doing my research on this, what came up, I imagined that there were instances of this, but I did not find any evidence of it. But I found instances of the American, Israeli, and Texas flag all over Texas. And I don't know if my spouse is a Texan, and Texans love
their
being
flag.
from Texas, and they love their flag. It's like Texans and South Carolinians are like the most obsessed with their state symbols. The palmetto and the crest, that's South Carolina. But what do we think about this idea? Our national flag speaks to us with the voice of religion and partakes in the sanctity of our religious symbols. Like in a very rudimentary way, I want to ask, like, true or false? Like, does that strike? Do we feel like, yeah, that seems like my religious conviction?
In our prayers. So to the extent that we're praying for the government, and we definitely need to be praying for the government, I think it's altogether appropriate for really to say that it's part of the Jewish religion.
Good night. So I want to push back on this just for a second and say, and offer. So if we're saying, if we're offering our prayers for the government and accepting that as appropriate, to me that would be us using the voice of religion to speak to the flag and to speak to our, rooted in our authentic religious Jewish experiences, to bring that to bear on our patriotic ambitions, rather than saying that the flag itself is speaking to, is imposing or is speaking to us in terms of our own religious understanding.
I specifically praying, and our prayers state that we're dealing for and may its government, its leaders and advisors, and all who exercise just and rightful authority. We really do, more than ever, need to pray for something like that. And if the American flag is there, symbolic of the American government, the American people, I personally have no issues with that.
Can I ask, because you're offering, can I ask, would you object to its removal? Would you object to the removal, like if we were to come here, if there was an effort to remove the flags from our sanctuary? You're saying you have no issue with their presence, but would you object to their removal?
Would I object to their removal? Not my call. I would let the Mora Ta'atret make that decision.
All right, so I heard you say get rid of it all.
By the way, we don't have them here. And ironically, since we're concluding the services with Hatikva, it is a little bit unusual not to have a flag in the sanctuary. But again, removal is a different story than placing them in the first place. Removal is a deliberate act of taking it out, and I would say that would be problematic to many in the community.
So you're
Politics should really be in the shul at all.
so you would say, so is that remove all flags or some flags?
I mean, I like to look at the American flag and the Israeli flag on both sides of the bima. It's nice, it is inspiring, but does it really go with Judaism? Maybe the Israeli flag could be argued, but the American flag, not really. And I don't miss them in Chabad either. I like them where I see them at other shuls, and I don't even notice that they're not there at Chabad.
No.
Yeah, so another thing might be is what's special about this author you chose, and who is he?
Sorry, where?
Who you're quoting?
Well, so this is the
the
Reform
response
Movement's legal committee. This is the Reform Movement speaking.
So every denomination has a group of people that come together to talk about modern day law using, ancient law, so to speak. And so this is the Reform Movement's version of that. Yeah.
No. So here where it says CCAR Responsa, there's two of those are here. Reform, those are Reform. Yeah, because there are the conservative movement has not addressed this question at all in a formal way. Various Orthodox rabbis have responded in just like it's all over the map. There's sort of like not a consistent thing to take from it. Although I think, as I can understand, you just shared sort of the leading thought, which is like, does it belong there? Probably not. But taking it away would upend the shalom of the community, and so we shouldn't do it. I think removal is probably, as I said, like removal is a statement, but many synagogues just never put it in there to begin with. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
Goes back to the Talmud.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I find it hard to buy any argument other than that this is sort of an adjustment to the reality that Jewish diaspora has been hosted in other countries that are not Eretz Yisrael for the majority of our history. And so, having said that, I would think there's probably lots of traditions and rulings that come down to pragmatic survival. I mean, especially, if you can break Shabbat to save a life, then presumably we can make adjustments in, bringing in a flag or bringing in some sort of obeisance to the state that we live in order to ensure that we're comfortably hosted in that country.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic.
In countries of oppression, sometimes the flag was flown as a necessity.
Yes.
And one of the things the Nazis did in particular was not to allow Jews to fly the swastika. And one of the things that in the Soviet Union you had was the Soviet flag, and specifically not the Israeli flag. And the only time in a Soviet synagogue that the congregation was absolutely silent was when you said the prayer for the state.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we have throughout adapted to survival. So I think actually let's finish just with this, a little bit of this, the more recent responsum, which I think speaks a little bit to like our perceptions of ourselves in diaspora. And again, it's a little redundant. The thinking, like that sort of is the way that response will work. It's a little redundant, or building at least on what's been said before. Let's see. There's no clear distinction between the six-pointed. So this comes in 1977. Another question to the committee, more or less the same question. We're seeing these flags. Should they be there? The six-pointed Star of David is now commonly recognized as a symbol of Jews and Judaism throughout the world, both by ourselves and our neighbors. There's no clear distinction between Jews and Judaism, between our religious and our national aspirations. Our prayers have constantly contained petitions for the return to Zion and the reestablishment of Israel. Here's a bunch of examples. We, in addition, pray for the academies in Israel, Babylonia, and the diaspora, for the local congregation, for the Gentile government. These have been part of the service either since the Talmudic period or, at the latest, since the 14th century. In other words, the service has for a long time contained side-by-side prayers expressing the desire for a return to the land of Israel, gratitude for the land in which we live, and hope for the welfare of our own communities. So actually there, I think the service flag, to me, hits all of those, right? Or maybe not the land of Israel, but it bridges that our own communal need with the patriotic one. The flags of the United States and Israel on a pulpit might be said to symbolize the prayers which have always been said in the synagogue. For this reason, there is no religious objection to placing an American flag on the pulpit, nor to placing an Israeli flag alongside it. Of course, there are specific secular regulations about the placement of such flags, which should be followed. So I think this is, how does this bit sit with us? We are known by our neighbors in these ways, and that justifies our expression of sort of dual nationalisms. Nodding means yeah, sure.
This specific rationale speaks to me more than the previous rationale. The idea of this is our symbol, we might as well use it, as opposed to the flag has, the national flag speaks to us with the voice of religion and therefore partakes of the sanctity of our religious symbols. That feels a little too avodah zara, or comparing the American flag to tefillin, which is explicitly a religious symbol.
Yeah.
That argument from the 50s doesn't land for me. This one lands a bit more, is a bit more.
I also think there's a difference between Eretz Israel and Medinat Israel, right? Like the tradition of wishing for a return of the Jewish people to Zion, I don't think might necessarily land as much as, okay, now we've got the Israeli flag. And so, like, by extension, yeah, I mean, I was thinking the same point as, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that certain symbols are part of the tradition and yet don't rise to the level of tefillin or a menorah or, are explicitly religious symbols.
One of my detours in getting ready for this that I didn't bring here was some of the discussion around the emergence of the Israeli flag, because the Israeli flag more or less had been the Zionist flag. And in the early decisions about symbology in the new state, there was a strong minority that wanted to make sure that they altered the flag so that they distinguished between the extant Zionist flag and the new State of Israel flag for this reason of like, we want Jews all over the world to be able to continue flying a Zionist flag or a flag of national aspiration that doesn't necessarily relate them to a country of which they're not citizens. And that sort of just fell apart, like as an effort. Yeah, they were busy. Yeah, exactly.
If you use the methodology of Jacob Katz and David Ellenson for understanding the decision of 54 and 77, you would have to point out to, in 54, the reform movement was driven by the question of what is the role of the State of Israel.
Yeah.
Many Reform rabbis at that point were for the American Council for Judaism and against the state, and wanted to differentiate between the state and the religion. After 67, that was transformed within the entirety of American Jewry.
Yeah.
And we had then developed the civic religion, to use Jonathan Wucher's role. Civil Judaism was remembrance of the Holocaust and defense of the State of Israel. And consequently, when Walter Jacobs writes this, he's writing it in a thoroughly different context than was written 22 years earlier. And that's the transformation in American Judaism and the response and the impact of history on American Judaism. So a historian looks at this and says, of course, because we see the transformation that has taken place, and be interesting to see what transformations take place as our history evolves in its own uniquely problematic ways at this moment.
Sure. And I wonder, and I thank you for raising that. And I wonder if we can understand sort of the same frame that Diego brought up earlier of like, so in 77, is it a halachic, is it a true halachic determination, or is it just a political, a decision that's subject to the political reality of the communities that the reform movement was serving? We may never know. I mean, we can speculate. But so this has been really wonderful. I don't have like a button it all up, but this has, I think, been really just a wonderful conversation around flags and meaning and how we make sense of it here. But I do want to close with what Kaplan wrote for this occasion. So this was, he imagined this to be like like anyone, anywhere could say this in a school or a civic occasion, or a civic ceremony on Flag Day. On this anniversary of the adoption of our national banner, we have endeavored to bring to mind all its solemn and sacred meanings. May we be ever aware of the noble purposes and deeds, the valor and heroism, the devotion to freedom and justice that have made our flag sacred. Let us renew today our pledge of allegiance to the flag and to the sacred ideals for which it stands. May we never make of it a mere fetish, nor of our salute to it an act of blind idolatry that commits us to nothing but national self-pride and self-will. But let our salute to it be a token of reverence for the spiritual ideals of our people, a self-dedication to a national life that advances the cause of God's kingdom of freedom and love.